Hi everyone, Alon Litzia, the CEO of October Health. Really excited. I've got Tando Mkosi with me. He's the group executive for Vodacom. He's got a very large portfolio under him. It includes people, culture, and leadership within the Vodacom group, which is not a small group. No. So we'll unpack that. And Tando, thanks so much for joining me. Really great to have you here. Always love to start off these conversations just hearing a bit about your story. How did you get to where you are today at Vodacom?
Perfect. Adam, thanks for the opportunity. It's great to be here. Actually, this year, I'm 10 years at Vodacom.
Okay, amazing.
During which time I've done a few different roles. First role was when I joined in 2014. I actually came in to look after the 4 markets outside of South Africa. So we've got what we call our international markets, Vodacom South Africa, obviously as a mainstay, but we've got the DRC, was a big visitor in Tanzania. So my role was to help provide support, leadership, guidance, and governance around those markets, which I did for about 6 years or so. And then in 2019, I then pivoted into a different role where I have now become the group lead for the Center of Expertise across 8 countries across Africa. Of course, in that time, we had 5 markets, but now we've since have acquired Egypt, we've acquired Safaricom Kenya, Ethiopia as well. Then that makes it about 9 countries. And then there's one market within Kenya called M-Pesa Africa as well. So 9 countries, and my responsibility, like you said, people, talent, and culture, which is basically how do we transform the organization across the different elements of talent management, org effectiveness, diversity and inclusion, and leadership of talent across the footprint.
And that's not easy. As you say, I mean, that's nine countries. How many people is that across them?
We've got about between 16 and 18,000 people.
Yeah, so a huge number of people.
Correct.
Very diverse positions as well, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Across the kind of the range of services that are offered by the group. So how do you drive that cohesiveness? How do you even start to think about culture across such a large organization?
I think, for me, culture is how we get things done around in certain areas. And I think at the present moment, fortunately, we're busy with a culture transformation journey across Vodacom. And the way it started, Alan, really was when we globally appointed the group CEO, Margarita Delaval. There was a need to rethink the strategy across the organization. And I think at the moment, we are on that path of taking a leader-led culture transformation journey, because when she came on board, her question was, how best to enable a customer-focused organization? How do you simplify things? How do you grow this organization going forward? With that in mind, then came a question of saying, we must find a way to engage our leaders across the footprint, across globally. And we had a few workshops conducted with the global leadership team with the view to unpack what some of the areas of concern. What we found was there were a few areas of concern that we picked up in terms of how we deal with the customers. Customers are the backbone of our organization. We have a massive customer base across the footprint of Africa, across the world, and that we have to deal with 200 million customers, in fact, across the region. And to think about how we service them, how we support them becomes an important aspect. And that comes with the leaders themselves. In that, a few principles also prevail. One, you mustn't be a spectator in what you do. You must get involved and get stuck in and support that. But what also enabled that journey was our spirit behaviors across Vodacom, which basically talks to things like how do we experiment and learn fast? How do you earn customer loyalty? How do you create the future? And how do you get it done together? So if you look at those 4 pillars of our organization strategy, they talk to our leadership standards, leadership framework, that then becomes the backbone of how we drive things going forward. So the culture then agenda has been premised around those 4 areas for our spirit behaviors, our 3 key growth engines, customer service and growth. And then for the continent, then my role then is to say, given where we find ourselves against that framework, where are the gaps, how do we drive it, what do we do going forward? What we also did, in addition to Ellen, we then also looked at our employee survey, because that becomes a key drive and an enabler of understanding the issue that we have as a business and how we drive that going forward. So what we've then been focusing on in the last few months has been enabling the shifts that are critical for our business to be able to move from where we are now, where we need to be, like I said earlier, from a spectator on certain aspects and taking action, allowing people the space to actually act with confidence and being bold and courageous. And I think allowing people to make mistakes. For me, experimentation becomes a crucial part of driving that agenda going forward. And that's kind of been the agenda that I'm driving. In fact, as we speak today, we're having a session with the team on campus where we're going through, the culture transformation journey, the shifts that we need to focus on. And the plan then will be to ignite that sort of culture shift across the Vodacom group, across Africa as well.
Sure. So it's not an easy task. I think
No,
you've got to
that's not.
acknowledge and celebrate. I mean, Vodacom's a top employer, so clearly you're getting these things right, and you're getting them right at scale. But what I loved about what you spoke about is how I think the customer, when you spoke about culture, you started off speaking about the customer, and that then kind of trickles down into everything else from a cultural perspective. And I think you feel it as a Vodacom customer, that the customer is core to your culture and everything's built around it. So
Right.
amazing how that kind of translates to the end product. So again, I think just as a customer, a testament to the fact that it is happening. In terms of, I think what we're here to really focus in on today, there's so much there that we could unpack, but is this concept of psychological safety. And we recently released a report with Gibbs, and it was focused on workplace well-being. And there were three interesting findings. And the first was that traditional employee assistance programs don't move the needle on individual well-being. It's important that your staff do get access to care when they need it, but that in itself is not going to shift the needle. The factors that shift the needle really comes down to two things, right? And I think they're related. The first is psychological safety, and the second is trust and leadership.
Right.
And, I know we're here and we're going to focus in on psychological safety, but maybe before we get into that, how do we define this concept of psychological safety that people think throw around quite a lot, but I don't know if we really understand what does it mean to create that safe environment?
Part of my earlier comment, Ellen, and I'm glad we're talking about this topic today, it's an area of interest for me as well. I spoke earlier about the fact that we want to give access to employees to give us feedback on areas of issues that affect them as employees, and also customers likewise. So I think for us, it's about the ability to be able to speak your mind, speak up without the fear of being embarrassed, without the fear of being rejected or being punished. Because by allowing them the space and the freedom to speak their minds, we are then providing an environment where psychologically you are safe to speak up, you're safe to express your views and share how you feel about certain things. And I think that's how, for me, the journey starts. It's about, is there trust between me and my employee, trust between us and the employee, and allowing them that space to speak up and share information? Because I believe by doing that, we are providing them an access of employees who have the capacity to speak, become more creative, become more innovative, and at the same time, I think give us feedback on things that they feel we're not doing well and supporting them on. So that's for me is where the psychological safety aspect comes through, that there must be mutual respect, there must be trust, there must be a platform where I'm not punished if I'm speaking my mind, and I won't feel the need to be rejected and feel I can't then share my views and perspective on certain things.
Yeah, so I think it's so powerful, right? I think just to reinforce some of these key points that you make, I mean, it's critical to that culture of experimentation, right? Because if you don't have that safety, you're not going to experiment, right? You're going to stay in your lane and do the less risky things. So it's actually critical to the innovation, which is critical to the future of a business like Vodacom.
Absolutely.
So I think an important aspect, though, is, employees need to be given the platform to kind of give that feedback. Right? And I think, if we think about feedback, there'll be kind of two buckets, and I'm going to, generalize here. But on the one side, they're going to be things that you agree with and you'll look to address. And maybe starting with that, how do you do that? How do you close the loop with employees? Because if you're just getting feedback and, it's the same kind of constructive feedback or criticism that is being leveled as part of this feedback mechanism, but nothing's changing, you're going to destroy that psychological safety. So how do you handle that type of feedback, and how do you ensure, again, in an organization as complex as Vodacom, you can take on that feedback and then institute change?
Let me take you back a few years now to the pandemic phase of our lives. I mean, I'm sure all of us would have gone through that journey and experienced it differently. One of the things that for me was quite interesting during that time was there was a sense of vulnerability by all of us, and everyone felt a sense of uncertainty, a sense of angst, a sense of anxiety. Just having people share for the first 10 minutes of the meeting how they're feeling was a good starting point. And I think I would do that deliberately because there'll just be a meeting for us to share how you're feeling, share about your family, yourself, where you're at, how you're feeling, how supported are you, where you are at that point in time. And I think at the same time also, bringing back my employer hat and line manager hat of saying, how can we support you? That one was the biggest trigger that sort of created a platform where people felt safe to be spoken to and to share how they were feeling. And what then happens is that post-pandemic, you almost build that momentum by creating platforms where what we do now is we have a check-in moment, right? So we have a check-in before every meeting. How's everyone feeling? How's everyone doing? Now, that check-in is informed by a few things. It's more of a personal check-in than a workplace-based check-in in terms of we are not going to start off the conversation by discussing about work. Let's talk about where you're at, how are you feeling? Which then brings me to the current journey we're on currently as a culture shift. We talk about a principle called me, us, and it. It's easy at times, Ellen, to be thrusting ourselves straight into the it because that's what we get reviewed upon. That's how we get measured against. But the it is informed by the me, though. So if I'm not in a good space as Tando to be able to express how I'm feeling, then the us is not going to work. So the me, us, and it principle has been quite fundamental in shifting the thinking around: are we providing a platform for our employees where speaking their minds and being free doing that is the way to do it, or not? And if not, what are we shifting and changing about that? Where they're also creating tools that allow line managers to be able to unpack this check-in process. I mean, I'm not expecting every meeting you have a check-in of 45 minutes, but I think as a fundamental principle, though, we're going to try and find ways where your engagement sessions, one-on-ones, check-in meetings do have a sense of a structured conversation around this. So we're giving them tools to be able to provide a check-in around what are you feeling today, how are you feeling at the moment, where you at in your family, how can we support you differently. The other part for me has come through the way we do our engagement surveys. Our surveys they're done every quarter. And how we do the survey is that we do provide in there a question that says, at this point in time, verbatim, how are you feeling? What are you telling us? And what triggered this as well was post-COVID or during COVID, employees gave us feedback about a lot of things that we should have changed and done differently. One of those for me came around people having different responsibilities. So we've got staff who've got different accountabilities at home, for whom COVID became quite a tough process to be in. And one of those examples that came through was how we even transformed and changed our parental leave policy. So, it's easy to say, as a non-birthing parent, as a male, for example, if my wife gives birth, I take about 4 days off, but is that enough, though, to be able to provide and support to my wife? So at this point in time, both parent and non-birthing parent get about 6 months as parental leave, which for me goes beyond you just being a birthing parent. And also in an inclusive environment that we have, not everyone will be able to give birth and be able to fall pregnant, but those non-birthing parents, either in a same-sex relationship, same-sex marriage, can also adopt kids if they wanted to. So I think those are the kind of tools we've sort of brought in play to be able to create a platform where, by speaking up and sharing your views, we are listening to your perspective, we're listening to you, we want to hear your views. And in doing that, then also we're allowing you to give us feedback about things that you feel are important to you. The last part is that as part of the revised strategy on our performance management, we encourage every employee and employer, line manager and employee, to have conversations around their performance review conversation. Where it's not limited to a once-off annual conversation only. Quarterly, we prescribe that you should have a quarterly conversation. And in that, there are questions and tools that allow the employee to sort of frame the conversation, ask the right questions, clarify their perspective. And of course, if any of these models don't work, any employee is allowed and has got access to a grievance process that allows them to have that conversation. So I'm hoping through those examples, we've sort of provided a platform where there is a trust-based kind of framework that allows me as an employee to share my views and perspectives. And I think also as part of the current journey that we are embarking upon as a business, we have, the sort of the 4 statements where we provide employees at the platform say, I'm sorry, I didn't know, I need help, and I was wrong. And that vulnerability gives you access to you being able to share where you're at, how you're feeling, and how then we can provide support to you as an employee as well.
Yeah, so much there. I think what I love about what you're doing is that you're not leaving it to chance, right? You're creating structure and giving both employees and manager these toolkits to practice a lot of the skills that are needed, or a lot of the the actions that are needed. And I think the actions are critical, right? Because if there is feedback given and there's no loop being closed, then there's the trust being broken.
Correct.
Right? And you're ensuring that you're showing authentic care by answering or asking some of those questions. And then secondly, you're closing the loop with employees, which is critical to trust. I think there's another bucket of feedback, and I think this one's always maybe a trickier one, right? Where you hear things from employees, but there may be things which are just not possible for the business, right? So an extreme example, everyone wants to get 30% increases, right? And obviously that's just not practical. How do you handle those kind of the feedback from employees, which is just not practical, because obviously you can't necessarily accommodate everything.
Sure. It's interesting. Just yesterday, we're having this conversation with some of my colleagues. My other portfolio is about diversity and inclusion, and we're talking about broad topics that span from 30% increase to having the need to create inclusivity around different accessibility points, bathrooms and usual bathrooms, usual toilets, and where we've sort of created a platform of engagement. Ellen has been to, in the diversity space, we have diversity engagement forums with employees. So we've got women, got LGBT, got disability. In fact, this morning we had a webinar that speaks to that, about having inclusivity for our customers. We've got about 80 million people in Africa who are disabled, and of that, there's some customers of Vodacom that you must talk to and sort of take care of. So there is a need to think differently around how do we then support all those customer needs with their uniqueness, with their diversity, and also be in a space where the creativity comes in. So in cases where employees are raising grievances around reward and benefits, raising grievances about diversity and inclusion, we obviously are open to inputs like that. We're able to handle and discuss those and get feedback from those kind of issues. In cases where we are not able to respond, there's no response, no valuable response, because we can't respond to what is deemed to be an unreasonable request. However, in cases where there's an opportunity of understanding and unpacking more, we invite employees to conversations like that. So we have, for instance, an employee consultative forum that has been established for employees to be able to share their grievances. In some markets, we've got unions and shop stewards that allow for that. But for the most part, we also have a speak up that we've established in the business, where if you feel there is a process or system or behavior that is untoward, please share and let's get to hear about that. And when that then is received, it is then channeled to the right area where it will require the help and support that is needed. In addition to that, though, in the same vein that we talked about the reward kind of example, we have what we call a fair pay principle, Ellen, which is basically looking across different platforms. Are we rewarding employees in line with gender specifications? So are male and female colleagues at the same rate of pay or not? And I think that for me is an important part of our business and how we look at that. Are we rewarding employees in a way that makes their livelihoods better than they were before they came to the organization? Is the environment in which we operate enabling a living standard that is sort of quite fair and reasonable? And I think also for me, are we at par or at the same benchmark with other industries out there? So there's a constant quest, I think, from a Vodacom point of view, to review, understand, and appreciate exactly, where are we against the fellow peer group? What can we do differently? And I think for me also triggered by the employees challenging us, those are then opportunities for us then to go and find solutions that are sort of aimed to support them and give them a perspective that, yes, we probably have got this one right, or maybe this one wrong, but then where we can do different as well, see where we can improve on our current systems going forward.
Yeah, so I think that's really powerful. And I think a lot of what you talk to is just around this transparency, right? And you're just being, to your point, whenever you can, as transparent as possible with employees. And, again, you may not be able to accommodate the request, but you can explain the logic behind a decision in a way that's transparent. And employees have a number of forums and a number of channels available to, get that feedback and give that feedback. I think something else which you spoke to is this concept of employee resource groups, which I think is also another element of psychological safety, right? Because everyone can find their own community, right, of people who share some form of commonality within the larger group. So is that something which you've formalized? Is it something which happens in a more organic type of way? How do they work within the Vodacom environment?
let me maybe focus a bit on the diversity and inclusion part of the portfolio, because what we've done there is we have, for example, a program called Count Me In. The Count Me In campaign really was intended to create an opportunity for employees to, firstly, we don't want to leave anyone behind. And also to create allyship, we want then everyone to feel included and feel that they belong. So it's an anonymous platform where you can literally go online with success factors, go to the diversity and inclusion link, and you actually link and confirm that I've got a certain disability, whether it's a known and visible or invisible disability, you link in there. It doesn't come through to me or to us. We don't get to know that. But what it does is that at the back end, we're able then to understand from our group of employees which employees have got certain disabilities and how then do we cater for their needs going forward. That's just but one platform.
So that data is really, really
But data then becomes informed because, we can then, for example, then know that, okay, in our category of employees, we've got X number of employees who have got a certain level of disability that sort of requires a certain help and support. This morning, I spoke about the webinar. There was an employee who asked a question about how do we cater for, color blindness, because it's a small thing you don't think about. But now that we're working on a very remote model with Teams and all these platforms, the color brightness may be different for certain people because of their different sensitivities. So that is an important part of the conversation. Small things like, we have now a platform on Teams where you can actually create the Teams platform to be able to transcribe the text as you're speaking. And of course, with AI coming on board, there's now even a far more enhanced opportunity of leveraging the system and tools going forward. In terms of the other engagement platforms, yes, we formalized your engagement platforms in terms of the disability platform I've mentioned. We formalized your LGBT platform, the women engagement platform. But beyond that, what we've done, Ellen, is to also formalize the sponsorship of those programs. So, for example, from a disability point of view, our group sponsor for that is our group CEO, Shamil. So Shamil has been spearheading and sort of supporting that agenda for us. And this morning at the webinar, he actually was the one leading from front and sort of channeling, because November is our disability month. He's under leading that program going forward. For Women's Forum, we've got also our Group Chief Financial Officer, Rai Sibe, who's leading that charge in front for us. So what you'll see from this kind of opportunity is that we are not just talking about the concepts, but we also have got a fully engaged leadership team that is fully behind and enabling this agenda, which then means that not only are we using the hierarchy of leadership, but rather the involvement of them to be able to appreciate, understand, and also sort of created an environment where people can belong, people can become included. So every time our leaders are traveling across the region and the footprint, we will find opportunities of engaging those different forums to be coming together. And of course, not only that, we do have our quarterly sessions of engagement that took place, purposely aimed at understanding what are people going through, how do we support them, how do we enable them. From a diversity and inclusion point of view, every month we've got a quarterly and a monthly call with the teams to understand what platforms of engagement do they have. We have, for instance, an engagement app that we've established as well, so that then we also begin to automate all of these things and not sort of have it only running once a quarter, but it can be on demand and used as when people are needing it going forward.
Sure. There's a lot there. And I think, again, the piece that I think stands out for me the most is the way that your exec leadership are actively involved in driving this agenda. And interested to know if it actually forms part of, both an exec leadership level, but a broader manager or leadership level. Is it something that you consider when it comes to individuals' KPI? Are they not only the me, the us, the it, right? Are they getting the it right? Obviously, that's important. But are they getting the us right within their teams and the environment that they're creating?
No, absolutely. I carry a target on our agenda. I carry a target on our disability colleagues. And that's part of our KPIs. We have a bold ambition by 2030, for example, to have 50-50 parity on gender and parity in the organization. And I must say, we are sitting pretty close to that target as we stand in 2024. And by all accounts, that is symptomatic of a very committed leadership team to make it happen. We have a very committed approach in terms of how we recruit, where we select. We're also focusing on how to build capability from within the organization. So we have got different levels of leadership teams where we have critical talent. And I think when you look at our talent matrices as well, we make sure that there is a focused approach around how much of the population is gender specific, how much of the population is disabled, how much of the population is from different ethnic groups, And that for me is actually the whole intent of a holistic inclusiveness that comes into play. Of course, in a South African context, race has been something that we've had to include as part of our agenda going forward. But that doesn't mean that if you are sitting in the DRC, Mozambique, that doesn't come through. So there is a deliberate focus even there to be able to look at it and be more intentional, more deliberate in driving that. So every leader has got a goal, has got a target that is reviewed annually, globally, and that has a quarterly focus from ourselves and to ensure that we're actually meeting our objectives as well.
Sure. Amazing. I think something else which I'm, really interested to understand is just, the point that you started with around this being a really diverse, very large group, right? And, it's easier to do this on the campus in Midrand where everyone's in one place, but a lot harder when people are in different countries. Some of these, your subsidiaries have kind of grown through acquisition. So how do you ensure this consistency, right, from a culture perspective, from a psychological safety perspective?
It's been interesting, must say, and I suppose it's exactly what makes the role exciting. So you talk about acquisitions. I mean, a simple thing that becomes a challenge is that when you acquire a business with a different system interface, you're not going to get it right. But I think what has been quite useful for me has been that I think I mentioned earlier on that we spoke about experimentation and learning fast. There's been areas where we had to experiment about how we do things. So for an example, one of the greatest models we've used to sort of drive a much more inclusive gender agenda came from our Safaricom colleagues in Kenya. Much as they are not within your system that is the same as Vodacom, Vodafone, we've taken their more structured and focused approach of looking at a broader diagnostic around what do you do to build capability in the organization in terms of female and gender talent. And I think the last 2-3 years have been the most consistent in terms of achieving that objective going forward. So yes, there are challenges in terms of integrating the systems, but I think the focus that we have as a leadership team from an HR point of view means that when we look at our goals, our objectives, there's a deliberate focus of ensuring that we at least operate on a common platform. So I mentioned earlier on that we talk about customer centricity and growth. So from a customer point of view, do we have this right KPI that we're driving as a team? That is constantly reviewed if we look at every year. We look at simplicity, how can we simplify? And then of course within that simplicity element, where can we take lessons of importance and alignment that we can leverage? Then the growth part becomes important. So annually, there's an annual review that we do to reflect on what has we done well, what do we stop doing, what do we continue to do. And that is what for me has been sort of the greatest joy, that across the different aspects of our business, there is that consistent that sort of prevails across how we look at things. On top of that, we have scorecards that we work with, and every CEO has got a scorecard that ensures that when we talk about gender, it's not just an HR responsibility, but it's a very much part of their own inclusivity aspects and agenda. And of course, on a monthly basis, in their reviews, should we pick up that there's a topic of interest that we feel doesn't have the right focus and attention, it then does become a focus area in those monthly reviews. So I think there's a consistency around the governance, the intent, and also execution of the same objective.
And I think just that use of data, right, and driving that accountability, right? This is not something which you feel, it's something which you can measure.
Correct.
Which is really powerful and I think critical to an organization at your scale. I think as we close, I think there's so much that we've touched on, and clearly, it's something that you need to be deliberate on. It's something that you need to constantly be innovating too. But I think what's clear to me is that this is not something that sits on the kind of periphery of the business. This is something which is core to the business, right? You're not driving culture as an afterthought or on the sidelines. It's very much part of what Vodacom is and what makes Vodacom successful. So I think that's clearly saying which is critical, right, to get right, especially at an organization of your scale.
Yeah.
But as we close, any closing thoughts, any kind of recommendations, suggestions, kind of things which, you felt have been exceptionally effective, specifically around psychological safety?
I think the two things for me there. One, I think at a personal level, I mean, you grow by allowing yourself to be vulnerable to your team, and by that vulnerability, I mean it's about being authentic and open and honest about what is affecting you at that point in time. It doesn't help if we're gonna be rocking up in an environment where you're not yourself, because then we're not getting the true value of who you are as a person. The second part for me has been it being an authentic process. So the me and us and the it part, it's being clear what are the mind traps that affect your being. Why are you not being open and true to yourself? What is affecting your way of thinking? And I think what has been opened up in the current journey that we're doing on culture has been being clear when you are triggered and you're in the box, and being open about your vulnerability. And I think calling out those behaviors, Alan, because it doesn't help if we're going to have these conversations in one-on-ones and not being present about those in public forums and public meetings. So I mentioned earlier the 4 I am statements. When you are as a leader vulnerable and role modeling that kind of behavior, you are in a better space and of allowing everyone to become more open, more free, and also being more, I think, expedient in becoming a real leader who's now authentic enough to sort of share their feelings and how they feel at that point in time. So I think for me, that those are the ingredients. Is it easy? No, it's not. It takes time to transform, but at least, it's being conscious in every meeting and being forum to say, I was wrong, I'm sorry, I don't know, I need help. Because those then sort of open an avenue for people to almost be sympathetic to your cause and to your need, versus, the gregarious character of, I've got it all under control. I think the last part for me is being bold and being courageous in doing so. So if you can be bold enough to be able to speak up and be courageous about doing that, I think it goes a long way in making you a better leader as well.
Yeah, so powerful. And I think that vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness, right? And I think it's also about shifting that mindset, right? Because there's stigma which associates vulnerability with weakness, but it's not. It's a strength, as you've articulated. Before I let you go, though, I can't not show off we talk a lot about this concept of performance psychology and the importance of grit and resilience. And I don't think there's a tougher race than the Comrades. You've done it 11 times. So any tips around how do you maintain that resilience when every part of your body and that mental toughness is telling you that you need to quit?
How much time do you have, Alex? Look, I think it's been an honor and a privilege to have achieved 11 Comrades. And maybe it's not, what to say, it's how you finish. I mean, I didn't set off to do 11 Comrades. It was one of those where you serve as a runner and you meet mates. In fact, it was funny because I used to run around this area and would meet every morning. And until I met a few friends who actually finished the race, that I think, oh, so it's probably possible. And out of that, for me, it's a basic thing of just putting the effort and the training behind it and determination. And where it has helped me is, to your point, mental resilience, because it's a tough race. If I lie to you, there's a lot of questions you ask yourself on the day, whether am I doing this for the right reasons? What about is my body not sort of taking a strain around this thing? But what I've learned from it, I think, is the ability of mental resilience. It's grit, determination. I was actually saying to someone the other day that you do the first one and think I've got it under control. But in fact, over time, I've improved my time significantly. My last Comrades, I think my time was 9 hours, 54 minutes, which was a huge improvement from my first one of 11 hours, 55 minutes. So you take every year as an opportunity of sort of improving yourself and becoming better. And therefore, if I sort of apply the continuous improvement kind of principle, that's what has happened to me over that time. Have I done enough Comrades? I think I have, Emmett. And maybe, next year may be a bit of a miss, but I think it is something that for me allows you to have the camaraderie, the spirit, the comradeship, I think, of the Comrades. And I think what the history of it is, I would ask every South African at least to have done the Comrades Marathon, because it's something that I think symbolizes the unity of our country, the people, the diversity, and I think overcoming obstacles and challenges, because it is only when you're on the road do you realize that when you're between Pietermaritzburg and Durban, you are not anything else but runners on the road who have to help each other. So if someone's struggling, you have to support them and along the way, at least get to know them. So that sort of helps you to also overcome fear of meeting other people. And I think finally for me, it's a spirit of just helping each other along the journey. And I think for me, we have a lot of issues as a country that you must deal with. But when you look at that sort of diversity of people on the streets running together, finishing together, holding hands, the comradeship, you realize that perhaps nothing is impossible after all.
Well, I love that. And I think it's the perfect way to end it off. I can't top that. So, Tando, thanks so much. Really loved it. So much to unpack and so much for our audience. So thank you and appreciate your time.